Welcome back, YouTube! This is Steam Shadow here with my second part to my Civil War series. Just as there are two sides to every coin, there is a flip side to this issue. Last episode, I talked about why the South seceded and why war was waged from the Union's view. Just as I promised, it is time to talk about the same two topics from the South side. Hey, I already talked about this! Fine, have it your way. I thought so. Now then, before they realize this machine gun is fake, let's dive in. I understand the hat, but do I really have to do this in a southern accent? I better get paid overtime for this. As with the other video, I will talk in full as to why we seceded, and why there was a war while skimming over the topics of state sovereignty and the legality of secession, for those will have their own episode. Now then, why did we secede? Well, for that answer, let's rewind the hands of time to when the British first settled the New World. Despite popular belief, the exact same people did not settle the North and us. Looking at immigration patterns, don't ask me how long it took me to find this. We were settled by people of Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland, and Saxon areas of South England. The New England colonies were settled more by traditionally English and East Anglia, or Puritans. The Middle colonies received the bulk of Quakers from the North Midlands of England. Thus, while the North was made up ethnically of Anglo-Saxon people, we consisted of Gaelic people. The Anglo-Saxons were a people who inhabited Great Britain from the 5th century. They comprised people from Germanic tribes who migrated to the island from continental Europe, their descendants and indigenous British groups who adopted some aspects of Anglo-Saxon culture and language. The Gaelic people are an ethno-linguistic group indigenous to northwestern Europe. Basically, they are two separate peoples with their own language, history, identity, and so on. Considering the turmoil between Scottish, Irish, and English people over Europe, it isn't surprising that these people did not get along over in America. Enhancing the difference between the two regions, while we were suitable to agriculture, the North was not. The North turned to trading, which generally helps promote industrialization. Consequently, when the North ended slavery and launched the Industrial Revolution, it led to urbanization, which led to increased education, which gave strength to the intellectual reform movements, aka abolitionism. Meanwhile, we weren't changing much. We still relied on agriculture and slavery for our economy. Despite relying on agriculture instead of industrializing, we were still prospering. By 1860, if we were an independent nation, we would have had the third largest economy on Earth. Back to the point, because of these differences, and probably others, the North ended up primarily industrial, urban or city-oriented, nationalistic, patriotic to the point of feeling superior to other nations or peoples, liberal, radical, conformist, agnostic, Catholic, progressive, business-oriented, and publicly schooled. Related to this, the North was also increasingly made up of immigrants, making it diverse in character. Thus, parts were Catholic while others were agnostic, some parts radical while others conformists. We, meanwhile, ended up agricultural, personal, rural, localistic, attached to one's local area, conservative, constitutional, individualistic, highly religious, Protestant, a non-Catholic Christian, traditional, family-oriented, and homeschooled. Compared to the North, we were more homogeneous. As noted by Anthony Trollope, a British novelist who traveled to America, the South, quote, had become a separate people, alienated from the North by habits, morals, institutions, pursuits, and every conceivable difference in their modes of thought and action. They still spoke the same language, as do Austria and Prussia, but beyond that tie of language, they had no bound but that of a meager political union. Going to just after the Revolution, the Founding Fathers sought to establish a nation. Despite the differences between the North and us, both regions thought a union together would be best. A union would make them stronger, as they faced a brave new world as a combined independent nation, compared to 13 separate nations bickering amongst each other. However, the North and us had fairly different interpretation of this union. We saw this union more as a business deal, that which can be broken whenever it is no longer in their interest to stay in the union. The North saw this more as a marriage, something you can't just walk out of, especially back in those days. Related was the issue of the size and power of the federal government as defined by the Constitution. To us, we felt the federal government only had the power explicitly given to it. In our view, that meant protecting the states. The North, meanwhile, felt the government had implicit powers given by the Constitution. More on these topics will be covered in a later episode. But here's one example. In 1803, the United States acquired land by buying it from France in what became known as the Louisiana Purchase. The president at the time, Thomas Jefferson, was in a peculiar situation. The Constitution did not say the president could simply buy land. However, it did allow the president to make treaties. Thus, the Constitution implied that the president could make a treaty to buy land. Basically, Northern leaders supported a loose reading of the Constitution and wanted to expand the size and scope of the federal government, even if that meant giving the government powers that were not authorized by the Constitution. Among other things, they advocated government subsidies for certain big businesses, federal control of the banking system, a high protectionist tariff, and massive public works projects called internal improvements. Most of our statesmen opposed these policies and instead favored a strict reading of the Constitution. We believe the federal government should perform only those functions they were expressly delegated to it by the Constitution. This debate would ensue up until the outbreak of war. In addition, during this time period, there was the issue of taxes. Back in the 19th century, there was no income tax. Taxes were based on imports and exports. The North, with its industry, manufactured most things it needed. We, meanwhile, had to import most manufactured goods and had an economy based on exports. In essence, despite occupying 25% of the United States, we ended up paying about 75% of the taxes, at least based on my calculations, but don't quote me on that. Meanwhile, these taxes weren't shared with us. The federal government favored protectionism with northern businesses and gave them subsidies. These subsidies came from our taxes. As Texas stated in its Secession Declaration, the North had impoverished the slaveholding states by unequal and partial legislation, thereby enriching themselves by draining our substance. For instance, the Northfication Crisis of 1832. When President Andrew Jackson raised the tariff, placing more burden on us, South Carolina threatened to secede. Although the situation was resolved, it emphasized the increasingly divided interests of the North and us. Even as late as 1850, John C. Calhoun, the famous Southern statesman and political theorist, noted this as one of his three main grievances against the North. Another was the differing interpretation of the Constitution. This leads us to our last major grievance in Calhoun's third issue, the expansion of slavery into the Western Territories. When the United States won the Mexican-American War in 1848 and acquired vast western regions, we fought to extend into these regions. The North tried to prevent that. We thought this was unfair. We were part of the Federal Union. We had given our fair share of men and money in defending and expanding the U.S. to its current border. We made sacrifices for the Union. However, to us, the North is trying to betray us by preventing them from sharing the land we fought so hard to obtain. 25% of Southern families had slaves. You thus reduced 25% of our people to second-class citizens. When the North denied territory to us, the North would make up 75% of the territory, leaving 25% to us. Needless to say, this seems rather unfair from our view. The implications of this were severe. If 75% of the nation became like the North, it would mean the death of us. Laws would be passed benefiting the North while harming us, and we could do nothing to stop it. We would be subjugated, a mere puppet to do the North's bidding. In addition, Northern slander against us also caused resentment. Authors like Harriet Beecher Stowe published books such as Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Story of a Slave. We considered these lies and exaggerations. In addition, there were many anti-South papers, most notably The Liberator, which also was considered as lies. I would explain more, but again, I'll save slavery for another episode. Basically, the North published stuff that we felt was insulting. Lastly, as stated in the last episode, the North believed in a slave power conspiracy. We were also insulted by this. We would note that neither our elite nor us ever controlled the government. We were very progressive in lowering voter qualifications and thus promoting mass democracy, removing the need to own property, with other states adopting universal suffrage by 1810. Many of these same qualifications were not adopted by northern states like Rhode Island until 1888. Thus, the power of the gentry was eroded. Basically, to us, the 1% did not control our politics, but 99% did. Also, all we had wanted was the equal balance of power to prevent laws harmful to us. As the history shows, most laws passed were compromises. However, by 1860, we feared even that was evaporating. Soon we would be under the thumb of a northern government who would use us for their benefit. Regardless of the actual threat, the fear was real, and that is why they seceded. One question that has been raised is why the North would publish lies against us. Well, not all of us agree. Some think it is a natural distortion, since we were a vastly different culture than the North. When Northern people, many of whom had never been down here, they tried to write and criticize us using their own standards. They were bound to distort the truth. For instance, at the time, if the North wrote an article about feudal Japanese society, it would be bound to be inaccurate. We would argue the same for us. Others, however, have less innocent explanations. Many believe the lies were intentional in order to further Northern interests at our detriment. I could talk more on this, but I will be here all day. For the record, most of us do not deny that slavery had a role in why we seceded. The conflicts of the Missouri Compromise, the Dred Scott decision, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and so on did indeed happen, revolved around slavery and increased tension between the two regions. However, as shown, we felt there was much more to the issue. Well, the stage has been set for secession. The spark that ignited it was the election of Abraham Lincoln of the Republican Party in 1860. The Republican Party was the first major and truly sectional party in American history. They only cared about gaining support in the North. Republican leaders frequently gave inflammatory anti-Southern speeches, some of which included egregious falsehoods and even threats. Historian William C. Cooper points out that Republicans had no interest in cultivating support in the South, which they branded as basically un-American, and that no major party had ever before so completely repudiated the South. During the 1860 election campaign, the Republicans distributed an abridged version of the book, The Impending Crisis of the South. This book spoke approvingly of a potential slave revolt that would kill untold numbers of Southern citizens in a barbarous massacre. In addition to being sectional, Republicans broke the tradition of having a sectionally balanced presidential ticket. For decades, the major political parties had almost always nominated tickets that consisted of one candidate from the North and one from down here. If nothing else, the major parties had always nominated tickets that appealed to more than just one part of the country. Each of the three other parties in the 1860 election nominated sectionally diverse tickets, but not the Republican Party. In addition, Republicans promoted policies that we completely opposed, such as a high protectionist tariff, a national banking system, etc. Remember, this is exactly what they pushed through Congress once we seceded. In essence, the Republicans just gave us the middle finger. Needless to say, we weren't too happy. In terms of slavery, we feared Republican leaders would try and abolish slavery by unconstitutional means, and that our slaveholders would not receive any compensation for their slaves. Our spokesman felt this would be unfair, since Northern slaveholders would have been able to receive various forms of compensation for their slaves when most Northern states had abolished slavery several decades earlier. They knew that emancipation without compensation would do great damage to our economy. Thus, it makes perfect sense what we did when Abraham Lincoln got elected. No Southern state voted for him. Heck, 10 Southern states didn't even put him on the ballot. And yet, with combined votes emphatically shouting, "No!" this man, leading a party clearly without any interest for us, is still elected. To us, we have no more power in the government. The entire nation has turned against us. The only thing we could do to save our self-subjugation is secede. Thus, in December of 1860, South Carolina held a special convention that voted for secession. For years, such Democrats as John Calhoun had inflamed regional and national passions in the state, raising voices of secession long before 1860. Thus, it is no surprise that they were the first to secede. Soon, 6 more states followed: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. In February of 1861, the 7 states came together, and as their ancestors did before, felt a union would be their best option, instead of going it alone. And they formed the Confederate States of America. And yet to us, war was not inevitable. We thought we could just pack up and leave. However, we could not have been more wrong. If you want to find out what the South says about why the war happened, please join me for part 2.